Governments always love to say that they are working for your financial freedom. They talk about concepts like stability, growth, and opportunity, but if you examine history closely, you will see a much darker picture. Governments have always used hidden financial tricks to keep ordinary people poor and to concentrate wealth and power in their own hands. And here's the shocking part. These tricks are not new. They have been reused for centuries, presented in different packaging, sold under new names, but always with the same purpose: to transfer wealth upward and keep the majority dependent. Let's start with the oldest and simplest trick: inflation. When a government spends more than it can raise through taxes, it has two options. It can either openly admit the truth and collect taxes directly from its citizens, which is politically dangerous, or it can quietly devalue the money, reducing the worth of every coin and banknote in circulation. Ancient Rome mastered this tactic. In the 3rd century AD, emperors facing military expenses began reducing the silver content of the denarius. A coin that had once been nearly pure silver eventually became mostly copper, with only a thin silver coating on top. The empire acted as if nothing had changed, but everyone holding those coins paid the price. Inflation surged, savings evaporated, and wages failed to keep up. It was a silent tax on the population, the same trick used today, just with central banks instead of imperial mints. In the Middle Ages, another version of this game emerged: forced loans. Monarchies in England, France, and Spain routinely pressured wealthy merchants and guilds to lend money to the crown. Of course, this was not voluntary. Refusal meant fines, confiscation of property, or worse. Sometimes the crown promised repayment, but it was often late, made in devalued currency, or never came at all. While governments maintained their wars and palaces, merchants had no choice but to surrender their capital. The trick here was disguising coercion as patriotism or duty, and it worked for centuries. By the 17th century, the financial system itself became the trick. When the Bank of England was founded in 1694, it wasn't out of charity. The government needed money to wage war against France. Wealthy investors bought government bonds, and in return the crown guaranteed interest payments funded through taxes. This sounds like a fair deal, but who paid those taxes? Ordinary people through duties on goods like salt, beer, and cloth. The wealthy lent money to the government and earned safe interest, while the poor paid higher taxes to finance those interest payments. It was a system of wealth transfer disguised as national finance, and it reinforced a pattern still alive today. The safest investments in the world are lending money to governments, and those returns are ultimately guaranteed by the labor and consumption of the masses. Fast forward to the modern world, and the tricks are everywhere. Take deficit spending. Governments pile up massive debts, and investors, banks, and foreign powers buy their bonds. Politicians tell the public this is for infrastructure, jobs, or social programs, but much of it flows into defense contractors, corporate subsidies, and bailouts. When repayment time comes, governments do not cut spending at the top. They raise taxes, devalue the currency, or slash social benefits. The trick is that the debt looks like it's for the people, but the burden falls on ordinary citizens, while the profits go to the bondholders. And then there are bailouts, like during the 2008 financial crisis. Banks took reckless risks, securitized toxic mortgages, and nearly collapsed the global economy. Who paid for it? Ordinary taxpayers, through massive government bailouts. Who profited afterward? The very same banks, which emerged bigger and more concentrated than before. The logic of the trick was simple: privatize the gains, socialize the losses, and the public was told this was necessary to save the system. Another sleight of hand is the way governments handle pensions and social security. For decades, people across the United States, Britain, and Europe have paid into government-managed systems, assuming the money would be there when they retired. But governments often do not actually save that money. They spend it immediately and leave IOUs in its place. Future taxpayers are set up to cover the cost when the bill comes due. It is essentially an intergenerational Ponzi scheme wrapped in official language. This system works until demographics shift, populations age, and the system becomes unsustainable. Then the government presents this as reform, usually by reducing benefits, raising the retirement age, or inflating away the value of payments. Notice, at every stage, the trick relies on perception. The public is told inflation is growth, forced loans are duty, national debt is investment, bailouts are stability, and pension cuts are reform. Language hides reality, the transfer of wealth from the many to the few, from the bottom to the top. And history shows this trick works because most people do not study economic history, do not understand financial systems, and do not see the trap until it is too late. In recent decades, the tricks have become even more sophisticated. Consider quantitative easing, a term most people had never heard before the 2008 financial crisis. Central banks created trillions of dollars out of thin air, buying government bonds and mortgage-backed securities to stabilize markets. Politicians and bankers reassured the public this was necessary to prevent collapse, and it worked for the financial system. Asset prices soared. Stocks, real estate, and bonds rose in value. But who owns most of these assets? The wealthy. If an average household had limited investments, the benefits were minimal, while the downsides appeared as distorted markets and rising living costs. The trick was simple. Money creation saved the system for those at the top, while fueling inflation and inequality for everyone else. Another modern trick is stealth taxation. Instead of raising income taxes directly, governments quietly impose taxes through mechanisms like sales taxes, fuel duties, and especially inflation. When prices rise faster than wages, the gap becomes a hidden tax on savings and purchasing power. Governments love inflation because it reduces the real value of their own debts, but for citizens, it erodes financial freedom. You may feel richer because your paycheck is higher in nominal terms, but if your costs outpace your earnings, you are actually losing wealth. This is not a flaw of the system. This is the system. Inflation is not simply an economic accident, it is one of the most consistent tricks governments use to shift the burden of their spending onto you without admitting it. Regulatory capture is another financial trick. On the surface, regulations are meant to protect the public. Financial rules, safety standards, consumer protections. But history shows that powerful industries shape the regulators who are supposed to oversee them. Railroads in the 19th century, oil companies in the 20th, and tech and finance today all have influenced rules in their own favor. This is the same dynamic the Peaky Blinders learned on the streets of Birmingham. It's better to own the referee than to play the game. Governments use regulation as a protective facade, but behind the curtain, large corporations carve out loopholes that reduce competition and increase profits. The public sees protection. Insiders see profit. War finance is yet another old trick in new clothing. During World War I and World War II, governments issued massive amounts of bonds, framing their purchase as a patriotic duty. People believed they were supporting their nation, and they were. But these bonds also became lucrative, risk-free investments for the wealthy, guaranteed by future taxes. In the 21st century, the pattern remains. Trillions spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were financed through debt, benefiting defense contractors, banks, and bondholders, while ordinary taxpayers bore the cost. The trick is that wars are always presented as temporary emergencies, yet their financial burdens last for generations. Governments also weaponize complexity itself as a financial trick. Thousands of pages of tax codes, financial instruments so complicated even professionals struggle to explain them, budgets filled with hidden line items and jargon. All of this creates an environment where ordinary citizens cannot possibly track the flow of money. Complexity becomes camouflage. If you cannot see the transfer of wealth, you cannot resist it. In ancient Rome, debased coins were the physical sign of the trick. Today, the trick hides in balance sheets, buried under acronyms and obscure programs. The game is the same. Make it too complex for the public to follow, and the transfer proceeds quietly. Why does this matter now? Because the tricks are alive and accelerating. Inflation eats away at your savings. Debt loads grow each year. Bailouts continue to be the reflex whenever markets wobble. Central banks keep manipulating the money supply, while governments pass the cost on to the public in ways so indirect that most people never notice. The result? A system designed to make you work harder for less real wealth, while the financial elite grows stronger. History teaches that these tricks always return. When Rome debased its coins, citizens suffered. When monarchies imposed forced loans, merchants lost fortunes. When modern states inflate and borrow, households bear the burden. Different eras, same mechanism. And here is the harsh truth. Most people will never escape these tricks because they don't even realize they are being played. They accept inflation as natural, taxes as inevitable, and bailouts as acts of mercy. They believe government messaging instead of studying economic history. And this is the most powerful trick. Forgetting the past makes you blind to its repetition. Governments and elites prefer a population uneducated in finance. Financial education is resistance. Economic history is a weapon. If you know the tricks, you are harder to manipulate. So what should you take away? First, don't trust the headline. When governments announce stimulus packages, ask who profits first. When inflation rises, remember it is not just bad luck, it is policy. When regulations appear, ask who wrote them and who benefits. Second, build real wealth outside the traps, assets that hold value even if currency does not. Third, never assume the system works for you just because it claims to. Systems exist to protect themselves, not you. History does not repeat, but if you fail to understand it, it will crush you just the same. The financial tricks that kept Roman citizens poor are the same ones draining your bank account today. The only difference is whether you recognize them in time. History holds the answers. Subscribe, and I'll show you where to look.